The Stephen Hopkins, one of 2,710 non-descript Liberty ships built by the United States to carry supplies to Allied forces during World War II. Named after the founding father from Rhode Island, the 7,000-ton, 441-foot-long Stephen Hopkins carried a crew of 56, including 40 merchant marines, 15 U.S. Navy armed guards, and 1 passenger, a soldier of fortune. With a top speed of only 11 knots, and all alone in the Atlantic, Stephen Hopkins was easy prey for the wolf packs. But like all Liberty ships, she was packing heat and carried an array of defensive armament. The Stephen Hopkins was equipped with a single stern-mounted 4-inch Mark IX gun, whose supplied SP Common Model 2 rounds weighed 62.4 pounds, had a muzzle velocity of 2,900 feet per second, and a range of 15,920 yards. The 33-pound projectile contained a 1.16-pound charge of Composition D, an ammonium picrate-based explosive. Rate of fire was 8 rounds per minute. Supplementing the Mark IX, the Stephen Hopkins boasted a bow-mounted twin 37mm M1 cannon assembly, firing 1-pound 5-ounce shells at 240 rounds per minute to a range of 3,500 yards. Additional armaments included a twin 50-caliber M2 heavy machine gun located aft center atop the deck housing, firing a combined 1,200 rounds per minute to an effective range of 2,000 yards. The twin 50s were augmented by 2 twin 30-caliber M1919 machine gun mounts, placed above the bridge on either side, firing 1,200 rounds per minute per twin out to a mile. After offloading a cargo of bauxite in Cape Town on its maiden voyage, the Hopkins was en route to Suriname through thick fog on the morning of September 27, 1942, when at 08:52 Lookout spotted 2 shadows in the mist less than 2,000 yards away. The closest vessel was the HSK-6 Steer, a 434-foot-long, 4,778-ton, 14-knot German commerce raider with a crew of 324, known to the Allies as Raider J. The Steer carried 6 150mm SK-L-45 guns, firing 100-pound shells at 7 rounds per minute to 19,200 yards, all under the control of a central firing director. The Steer also packed an 88mm SK-L-35 gun, firing 21.6-pound shells at 12 rounds per minute to 9,600 yards. These big guns were backed by a twin 37mm SKC-28 dual-purpose cannon, firing 1.5-pound shells at 60 rounds per minute to 2,200 yards, plus 4 20mm Flak 38 cannon, firing at 120 rounds per minute each to over 5,200 yards. The Steer was also modified to carry a pair of submerged torpedo tubes that held 2 preloaded G7A torpedoes with 671-pound warheads and a range of 15,700 yards. Also on board were 2 Arado 231 floatplanes, plus a newly acquired but obsolete Nakajima E-8N Dave. The Japanese plane was a gift to the Steer from her companion, the MS Tannenfels. This 509-foot-long, 7,840-ton blockade runner had a crew of 45 and could make 16 knots, a full 5 knots faster than the Stephen Hopkins. The Tannenfels was armed with a single 150mm SKC-28 deck gun, firing 100-pound shells at a rate of 8 rounds per minute to 25,000 yards. Secondary armament included a twin 37mm SKC-30 cannon and a brace of 20mm Flak 38 cannon. The duo had been roaming the southern oceans, hunting lone Allied merchant vessels beyond the patrol range of the Wolfpacks. They had already sunk 3 vessels on their patrol. Their surviving crews now held captive aboard the Tannenfels. The raiders were still in the water, ferrying supplies with a small boat while the crew of the Steer carried out paintwork. As the Stephen Hopkins hove into view, now just over 1,000 yards away, the German crews went to battle station. Aboard the Stephen Hopkins, the Americans did the same. Captain Horst Gerlach of the Steer ordered Captain Paul Buck of the Stephen Hopkins to surrender, but Buck wasn't having it. The Liberty ship made a hard turn to starboard, engines on full, alarms ringing, desperately sinking cover in a nearby squall. Gerlach opened fire. It was 08:55. The first round struck the deckhouse. More followed, pounding the ship's hull and churning the sea. Aboard the Stephen Hopkins, the U.S. Navy armed guard raced toward their guns as enemy shells raked the ship. Second mate Joseph Lehman, in charge of the Twin 37, dodged fire as he ran towards the bow, while main gun commander Ensign Kenneth Willett rushed toward the Mark IX. Willett was hit in the stomach, but pressed on. Meanwhile, the American guns sat idle. From the bridge, Buck called for engineer George Cronk to pour on more speed and shouted for the helmsman to hold the turn, wanting the stern with his Mark IX pointed toward the German. At the door of the wheelhouse, Chief Mate Richard Machowski eyed the enemy and shouted headings. Blood surged from a wound to his chest, but he stayed at his post. The Tannenfels joined in the fray, and soon all the available German guns were ravaging the Liberty ship. Gerlach watched in triumph as the Stephen Hopkins began to burn. It seemed the Americans would have to surrender, but that's not what happened. Joe Layman reached his post on the bow and unleashed the twin 37s, the shells hammering the steer. Soon the twin 50s joined in, and then the 30s. Tracers split the night. On the stern, Ensign Willett reached the Mark IX, clutching his bleeding stomach, and ordered his men to open fire. The Mark IX roared into action. The ship slugged it out at point-blank range. The 37s were hit, and Layman and his crew were killed. In the radio room, Radio Officer Hudson Huey tapped out an urgent SOS, but a shell from the steer struck square, cutting the message short. The steer tried to maneuver for a full broadside, but Buck kept the enemy stern on. The Mark IX continued to blaze away. Willett's crew targeted the waterline of the raider, sending round after round into the steer, disabling the torpedo tubes and setting the ship on fire. The Germans focused on the Mark IX and raked the stern of the Liberty ship, rounds ripping into the engine room, scalding the mechanics and slowing the ship to a crawl. As Willett's men fell, the merchant sailors rushed to fill their positions, each in turn meeting the same fate. Soon, Willett was killed as well, and the last man at the gun, Engine Cadet Edwin O'Hara, fired off the last few rounds alone, lifting the 62-pound rounds into the breach as the steer's shells tore at the deck around him. Then the Mark IX fell silent. The Stephen Hopkins was sinking. 20 minutes after first contact, Captain Buck gave the order to abandon ship. But there was only one surviving lifeboat. Buck helped lower it into the water and saw the 19 survivors off as German shells continued to pound the water around him. Captain Paul Buck remained aboard the Stephen Hopkins and went down with the ship. The steer was so heavily damaged that the Germans scuttled, her crew rescued by the Tannenfels. In his battle report, Captain Gerlach would claim he lost his vessel to a heavily armed cruiser. Meanwhile, the surviving Americans eluded capture in the fog under the command of Engineer George Cronk. Their journey had only just begun. 4 men would die of their wounds in the lifeboat. But 31 days and 2,200 miles later, the tiny vessel made landfall in Brazil, carrying 15 survivors of the SS Stephen Hopkins, the only Liberty ship to sink a surface combatant in World War II.